Performance management involves all of the human resource functions associated with evaluating and rewarding employee performance. Performance evaluation programs serve to guide human resource decisions, reward and motivate employees, promote personal development, identify training needs, and integrate human resource functions. The American National Standards Institute publishes a set of guidelines explaining how performance management should be implemented. This standard assumes that organizational effectiveness is enhanced when all employees know and share the strategic goals of the organization and know how to achieve their individual goals. According to this new standard, effective performance management involves three processes: goal setting, performance reviews, and performance improvement plans. Deciding what to evaluate is one of the most difficult aspects of developing a performance evaluation system. Deciding what to evaluate is, in part, a value judgment. The personal values of the individuals who design the evaluation system will be reflected in it. Most people agree that quantity and quality of performance are important dimensions to evaluate, but there is less argument about traits such as appearance, initiative, and enthusiasm. Most people say outcomes are more important than behaviors. They are interested in measuring results. Most performance evaluations focus on behaviors rather than results, especially for managers. Behaviors are easier to measure, while outcomes are often contaminated by outside factors, such as economic conditions. If the evaluations are used for compensating employees and other personnel actions, their focus should be on outcomes. But if they are used primarily for personal development, they should focus largely on behaviors. Rater error and biases are two of the main reasons why performance evaluations sometimes miss the mark. It is important to understand that missing information, improper or incorrect information, and one's subjective views can all affect the rating one is given in their evaluation. Proper training of supervisors and managers can help alleviate these types of issues. The performance evaluation process has been severely criticized, and the criticisms have prompted some managers to abandon performance evaluation as a useless and perhaps harmful practice. Some of the major criticisms of performance evaluations are problems defining performance, a tendency to rate towards the center, and recency effect. Classification procedures are probably the easiest procedures to use, but they are also the most unreliable and biased unless they are carefully developed and closely monitored. Classification procedures simply categorize individuals into one of several categories, such as high versus low, or outstanding, superior, excellent, good, average, fair, or poor. The objective of ranking is to order a group of employees from highest to lowest along some dimension, usually overall performance. There are three different methods of ranking: straight ranking, alternate ranking, and paired comparisons. Graphic rating scales are the most frequently used procedure for evaluating performance. Graphic rating scales appear in numerous forms and are used to evaluate both performance-related characteristics and personality characteristics. A procedure called rated ranking combines a ranking procedure and a rating process. The employees are first ranked, usually by an alternate ranking procedure, and then each employee is rated on selected scales. The initial ranking imposes limits on the subsequent ratings, since individuals who receive low rankings should also receive lower ratings than those ranked higher. The rated ranking procedure appears to reduce problems of subjective bias, halo effect, leniency, strictness, central tendency, and unreliability. Rating scales can use either a continuous or discrete scale for each item. A continuous scale means that the evaluator can choose any point between the two extremes for rating an individual. A discrete scale requires an evaluator to use one of a specified number of categories. Examples of several types of scales are shown on the slide. Discrete scales usually have at least 3 points and sometimes more than 30 points. The optimal number of categories is about 7, although experienced evaluators sometimes prefer as many as 10. The forced choice technique consists of a number of statements arranged in pairs as shown on the slide. For each pair, the evaluator must pick the one statement that is the most descriptive of the performance of the person, or for negative statements, the statement that is least descriptive. The pairs of statements are so designed that both statements appear equally favorable or equally unfavorable, but one statement is actually more descriptive of an outstanding or poor performer. In other words, the statements in each pair have equal social desirability, but unequal discriminability. The actual value or weighting of the statements is kept secret from the evaluators to prevent deliberate bias on their part. The evaluators cannot slant the rating to make the final score appear in any desired way. The evaluators are essentially reporters who check the statements that best describe an individual's behavior. The scoring of the statements is done in the Human Resource Office. A weighted checklist consists of a list of behaviors that evaluators use to describe the performance of employees. A checklist can be developed by obtaining a number of statements about employee performance from critical incident descriptions. After a comprehensive list of these statements has been compiled, a group of judges, either supervisors or job incumbents, evaluate each statement on a 0 to 10 scale regarding its favorability and contributions to organizational effectiveness. When the judges do not agree on the favorability of a statement, it is eliminated. The items on which the judges agree are then weighted on the basis of the average score assigned by the judges. The simplest performance evaluation form is a blank sheet of paper on which supervisors are asked to write a free-form essay describing an employee's performance. These essays typically describe the employee's job responsibilities and then explain how well the employee has performed them. The advantage of a written essay is that it is extremely useful for personal development because it contains specific performance feedback. The disadvantage is that essays cannot be easily compared, which limits their usefulness for some personnel actions. Management by objectives is a performance evaluation procedure because employees are required to develop specific, measurable objectives, and the extent to which they achieve the objectives is evaluated and reported. At the same time, however, MBO is a philosophy of management that emphasizes establishing individual and organizational goals, delegating authority and responsibility, providing feedback and assistance, and evaluating performance. As a philosophy of management, MBO emphasizes a results-oriented style of managing. Management by objectives is primarily a philosophy of management that espouses a positive, proactive way of managing rather than a reactive way. The focus is on predicting and shaping the future of the organization by developing long-range organizational objectives and strategic plans, accomplishing results rather than performing activities, improving both individual competence and organizational effectiveness, and increasing the participation and involvement of employees in the affairs of the organization. One of the best techniques for identifying the most important dimensions of a job is the critical incidents method. As the term implies, critical incidents are simply descriptions by qualified observers of behaviors that are especially effective or ineffective. Such incidents are actual behavioral accounts recorded as stories or anecdotes. They are obtained from supervisors, subordinates, peers, or anyone close to the jobs being studied. Supervisors can be asked to take time at the end of each week to describe briefly the behaviors of their subordinates, particularly noting any favorable or unfavorable incidents. Behaviorally anchored rating scales are similar to graphic rating scales, except that the scales are described more accurately by specific behaviors. Behaviorally anchored rating scales are typically developed using the critical incidents technique. Some critical incidents are descriptions of especially effective or ineffective behaviors. The best characteristics to include in an evaluation are those identified by the critical incidents method. An example of a behaviorally anchored rating scale is shown on the slide. A newer rating method similar to bars is called behavioral observation scales. An advantage of this method over bars is that it asks the rater only to describe the frequency of behavior, rather than to evaluate the quality of performance. The evaluator simply records the frequency that various behaviors were observed, always, frequently, occasionally, seldom, or never, without deciding whether the behaviors were good or bad. Performance appraisals are more accurate and useful when the evaluations come from sources closest to the person being rated. Assessors need adequate opportunity to observe behavior. There are several types of appraisals, such as supervisor appraisal, peer appraisal, and subordinate appraisal. The purpose of the evaluation should be to provide information for making important decisions. Some decisions, such as pay increases and personal development programs, should be part of the performance evaluation process. Other decisions, such as promotions, are usually made at different times, but performance information should be considered when these decisions Without a formal evaluation program, employers cannot defend their decisions to hire, fire, promote, discipline, or compensate. A defensible procedure should satisfy the following criteria: identify objective, job-related criteria, document performance events, communicate performance standards, use reasonable care, and train evaluators. Change typically results as a reaction to specific problems or opportunities the organization is facing based on internal or external stimuli. While the notion of becoming more competitive or closer to the customer or more efficient can be the motivation to change, at some point these goals must be transformed into the specific impacts on processes, systems, organization structures, or job roles. This is the process of defining the change. A change agent is someone who acts as a catalyst for change within an organization. When human resource managers serve as internal change agents, they have the advantage of being familiar with the organization and its members, and they can develop the long-term relationships and feelings of trust that are needed for successful change. Most organizational change efforts fail to produce lasting change. Some of the most important reasons why change efforts do not produce meaningful change are that the change was not tied to the organization's strategy, the change was seen as a fad or quick fix, or there was a lack of measurable goals and timelines. Organizations are required to change because of a broad variety of different forces. These forces can be analyzed in terms of both internal forces, such as new technology, versus individual resistance, such as a distrust of management, and environmental forces, for example, competition, and organizational resistance, like vested interests. Three kinds of change have been categorized according to their degree of complexity and their potential for resistance to change, as shown on this slide. These are developmental change, transitional change, and transformational change. There are 7 major targets of change: the individual personality, a dyad, a group, a work team, the entire organization or its divisions, organizational structure, and organizational strategy. It is important to identify the right target for change because if you select the wrong target, your change effort will not be effective. Suppose, for example, that the major cause of a problem is the failure of a work team to respond to the authority of a new supervisor. If this problem is perceived strictly as an interpersonal problem rather than a problem of a work team, the recommended solution will be to help the supervisor develop greater interpersonal skills or a more autocratic leadership style. Human relations training, assertiveness training, and other interventions that focus on the personality of the leader will probably do more to create feelings of guilt and inadequacy than to solve the problem. On the other hand, a group intervention that focuses on the work team will probably be much more effective in clarifying the authority relationship between the new supervisor and the group members. Organizational change strategies need to identify the proper target of change for the change to be effective. If an OD intervention focuses on the wrong target, the intervention could not only fail to solve the problem, but it could add to the frustration and dissatisfaction. Kurt Lewin's theory of change was derived from the laws of physics, which state that the position of an object and its direction are determined by the forces operating on it. Change occurs when the forces pushing in one direction are greater than the forces pushing in the opposite direction. A state of balance exists when the restraining forces acting to prevent change are equal to the driving forces attempting to produce change. The equilibrium point is determined by the resultant forces operating in different directions, as shown on the slide. According to the Dalton change model, change will not occur unless there is sufficient pain and tension to motivate it. Change needs to be supported by a credible source. Dalton's model identifies 4 sub-processes that involve movement away from one state to movement toward the opposite state to help ensure that the change persists. Some additional change theories are education, which is the assumption that new information creates change; reinforcement, which is that people do what they are reinforced for doing; peer group influences, which recognizes the influence of social norms; and inspiration of one's personal example, which relies on the inspiration of a change agent who creates change in others by modeling the appropriate kind of behavior. A useful model describing the basic approach of most organizational change activities is the action research model. This model is consistent with the scientific method of inquiry and its reliance on data gathering and analysis to solve problems. There are 6 basic steps in this model, which are data gathering, feedback of the data to the target group, data discussions and diagnosis, action planning, action, and recycling. Each of these 6 processes is important to successful change efforts. These 6 steps are continually repeated, as illustrated on the slide. Learning organizations are characterized by the willingness of people to seek, share, and use new information to improve the effectiveness of the organization. Members of learning organizations are willing to modify their behavior to reflect new knowledge and insights. Learning organizations are constantly examining their current programs and procedures to improve their production processes and internal procedures. Rather than ignoring past problems and forgetting about mistakes, a learning organization examines the cause of the problem and uses the information to avoid future mistakes. A learning organization creates a systematic procedure for collecting information from its members and customers regarding how well the company is performing. Customer feedback provides continual data for improving the company's current products and for developing new products and services. Benchmarking is used to identify the best industry practices. Obviously, the most significant advantage of a learning organization is continual renewal of the company and an enhanced ability to adapt to new challenges. Organizations evolve through a life cycle, and each evolving stage is characterized by a dominant issue and a specific change challenge that must be faced before the organization advances to the next step. It is very unlikely that a mature organization can maintain its size and market domination for an extended period without some form of revitalization. As organizations adapt to expanding global markets, changing demographics, and technological advances, human resource managers need to be able to work as strategic partners in guiding change and organizational development. An OD intervention is a set of structured activities designed to improve some aspect of organizational functioning. Most OD interventions involve only a loosely defined sequence of activities that are adapted to the situation. Interpersonal interventions are directed primarily towards individual learning, insight, and skill building. They are designed to improve the effectiveness of individuals and to contribute to personal growth and adjustment. A successful group intervention usually requires the involvement of all group members. In effective groups, there is a norm of cooperation and teamwork. Effective teams help their members satisfy their personal needs while cooperating to achieve the group's goals. The effectiveness of a group depends on the quality of decisions that are made, how carefully they are implemented, and whether task assignments and other responsibilities are carefully delegated and clearly understood. Responsibility charting is an intervention that helps clarify who is responsible for which action and decision. Conflict and tension between two groups typically produce undesirable consequences for an organization. Each group pursues its own self-serving goals with little regard for the success of the other groups in the organization. To calm the tension, intergroup interventions can be implemented, such as finding a common enemy, participating in joint activities, rotating membership, and holding conflict resolution meetings. The purpose of total quality management is to reduce errors to zero and to improve the quality of service. Although TQM programs are unique to each company, most of them share certain common elements: a customer focus, strategic planning, continuous improvement, and empowerment. There are 6 major steps in implementing a TQM intervention that are explained on this slide. Employee retention should be a major focus for human resource professionals and business executives. An organization puts enormous effort into recruiting, selecting, orienting, training, and developing employees. It is in the organization's best interest to keep these employees for as long as they are productive and producing quality work. Replacing employees is expensive and disruptive. Some organizations track the retention rates of specific groups of employees, such as new hire retention rate, high performer retention rate, department retention rate, or job class retention rate. The formula for calculating retention is the number of employees who remained employed the entire month divided by the number of employees at the start of the month times 100. To properly diagnose turnover, a distinction should be made between voluntary and involuntary turnover. Voluntary turnover occurs when employees have the choice to continue working for the organization and they intentionally decide to quit. Involuntary turnover occurs when employees are terminated for reasons beyond their control. 2 examples of involuntary turnover are layoffs, when the organization terminates employees because they are no longer needed, and dismissals, when employees are terminated due to incompetence or unacceptable behavior. Turnover is expensive. Business leaders are often surprised by how much it costs the organization when employees leave and must be replaced. The cost of turnover can be broken down into 4 major cost categories: separation costs, replacement costs, training costs, and lost performance. There are a number of strategies employers may use in an effort to improve retention. Better recruitment and selection, improving orientation and onboarding, participating in career development, and looking into flexible work arrangements are just a few.